Hello, welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Jean-Emile Jameen with your latest news from across the continent, and it starts with these headlines. Lawyers take to the streets of Tunisia's capital, protesting the arrest of another lawyer and TV pundit, Sonia Dahmani, a known critic of President Kais Saied. Then 2,000 families have been displaced in Burundi after recent flooding caused by heavy rainfall, the deluge affecting most of Africa's east, with schools in Kenya reopening on Monday 7 weeks later than expected. And the uncompromising Patriotic Alliance party is looking to make a dent in the upcoming South African elections, harnessing an electorate that feels let down by the ruling ANC and leading opposition, the DA. Thanks for joining us once again on Eye on Africa. Protesting lawyers took to the streets of Tunisia's capital on Monday, standing by one of their own. Sonia Dahmani, a lawyer and political commentator, was arrested by masked police on Saturday within the Bar Association headquarters. She had sought refuge there after refusing to appear in court over comments she made on a TV show interpreted by officials to be against a speech of President Kais Saied. James Vecina has more.
Shouting revolutionary chants, dozens of lawyers gathered in front of the courtroom in which a judge was expected to hear Sonia Dahmani's case. It's part of a nationwide strike to demand the lawyer's release.
She faces a political trial for expressing her opinions on television. This is a violation of her rights, of freedom of expression, and legal guarantees as a lawyer.
Those affected by Decree number 54 are predominantly journalists and lawyers who critique, expose facts, and freely express their opinions.
Dahmani's arrest took place this Saturday after hooded policemen stormed the capital's Bar Association office after Dahmani refused to appear in court over comments she'd made on television. During a debate earlier in the week, a commentator claimed that sub-Saharan migrants were seeking to settle in Tunisia, to which Dahmani responded with sarcastic criticism over the state of the country.
They want a piece of Tunisia.
What extraordinary country are we talking about?
The lawyer was arrested under Decree 54, which prohibits the spreading of false news. But critics say it's used to quieten dissent. It was signed by President Kais Saied 2 years ago, and as a result, over 60 journalists, lawyers and opposition figures have been prosecuted since it came into force. This according to the National Union of Tunisian Journalists.
Violence has reignited in Sudan this weekend as the United Nations reports another 27 people killed in one day. Fighting between the country's army and RSF paramilitary re-erupted this Friday in the key Darfur town of El Fasher. Nearly 1,000 more civilians were subsequently displaced, with communication blackouts and blocked access to medical supplies. Military strikes continued throughout Saturday and then Sunday, some of them landing within 50 meters of El Fasher's main pediatric hospital, causing the roof to collapse and killing 2 children in the process, all following the war between the army and paramilitary. The Kenyan government has published its annual finance bill this Saturday. It wants to raise an additional 2.2 billion euros in taxes in the financial year that starts in July. The tax hikes are part of a series of financial measures introduced by President William Ruto to fund its extensive infrastructure and social programs. Our Kenya correspondent Olivia Bizo has more.
The 2024 finance bill is out and Kenyans are not happy. Kenyan President William Ruto's administration wants to increase existing taxes and introduce new ones. That means that the cost of basic commodities like bread will climb and that the cost of airtime, mobile money transfers and data will increase by 15 to 20%. The move has generated sharp criticism from politicians, human rights activists and economists.
Debt to GDP levels have almost doubled over the last 10 years. So it tells you governments are now really falling over themselves to try and get every single coin. The problem is if you don't do that in a strategic way, if you just end up really looking for the easy fixes, the easy everyday goods, it looks easy on paper, but in economics we have what we call the Laffer curve that says, yes, you can add consumption taxes, yes, you can raise revenue in the short term, but what really happens in the long term is people find cheaper substitutes.
The planned taxes will be discussed in Parliament in June before potentially turning into law. If that process goes ahead, the opposition has said it will organise mass protests across the country, similar to the ones that it organised last year. After the government announced its 2023 finance bill, thousands of Kenyans took to the streets across Kenya, but those demonstrations quickly turned violent. Around 30 people were killed in the 5 months of protests.
Well, staying in East Africa, and deadly floods have continued to wreak havoc in the small nation of Burundi, which has struggled to deal with the torrential rainfall. Over the weekend, the country's government began the voluntary relocation of around 2,000 families which had been displaced. Sophie Lamotte has the details.
Crowds gather in this parking lot in Gatumba, eastern Burundi, in the hope to be relocated to higher ground. Although they're likely to stay in makeshift camps due to a lack of resources, these roughly 2,000 people will finally sleep on dry ground for the first time in months.
We thought the state had abandoned us. Thank goodness for that slight improvement, to have a place to rest. I've been living like a nomad for years.
In Burundi, one of the world's poorest countries, 80% of its population works in agriculture, and rising waters have spared neither homes nor fields. At least 29 people have died and tens of thousands have been displaced since the start of the rainy season in September last year, worsened by the El Niño weather pattern. Authorities are calling for international financial aid to support relief and reconstruction efforts.
The wish of the state is to save you from these floods. You know, there have been people killed by animals, crocodiles and hippopotamuses. We don't want that to happen again. There is work that will continue. We will help the students to continue their studies, especially those taking exams.
Burundi isn't the only country affected in the region. Hundreds of people have died across the Horn of Africa, and tens of thousands have been displaced since the beginning of the year.
And returning to Kenya, 90% of the country's schools have now reopened with caution, having only just recovered from the rainfall themselves. The deluge causing varying degrees of damage to around 2,000 schools, some being used to house families fleeing the floods. Originally scheduled for April 29th, the reopening has been postponed twice due to the poor conditions. Authorities this Monday have warned of more rain to come, urging caution against unnecessary travel. Moving on, and September 28, 2009 marks a grim date in the history of Guinea. Security forces massacred at least 157 people who had gathered in a stadium for a rally against the junta leader at the time, Moussa Dadis Camara. Some 100 women and girls were raped. A historic trial of Dadis Camara and 10 other senior figures from the junta was opened in 2022. On Monday, for the first time, lawyers for the victims were able to present their arguments in court. Sam Bradpiece, our regional correspondent, has the details.
Up until now, this trial has mostly seen testimony given by alleged victims, perpetrators and other witnesses. But on Monday, it entered a new phase. Lawyers for the civil parties, the victims, made their legal arguments to court, calling for the charges against Dadis Camara and others to be upgraded from torture, rape and murder to a more serious charge of crimes against humanity.
The attack, which took place on September the 28th, was a systematic and generalized attack against the civilian population. These were crimes against humanity. The international investigation led by the United Nations concluded that these were crimes against humanity.
The defense lawyers are pushing back against the idea of upgrading the charges.
The people tried here are being put on trial for specific charges, charges known for more than 10 years. We're talking about murders, assassinations, and rapes. With what we've heard this morning, they are completely taking us out of the framework of this trial. They are talking about crimes against humanity.
Lawyers for the civil parties will continue to present their arguments in the coming days before the defence has its turn. Nearly 15 years on from the stadium massacre, it's still unclear when a verdict will be delivered and what the final charges will be.
The office of South African President Cyril Ramaphosa on Wednesday announced he is set to sign into law the National Health Insurance Bill. The bill is aimed at providing universal coverage to all South Africans. It's been particularly well received by millions of the country's poor citizens as it seeks to overhaul a two-tier system accused of safeguarding previous inequalities based on racial lines. But business groups have strongly opposed the NHI bill, saying it will lead to disinvestment and damage South Africa's fragile economy even further. And this all comes ahead of elections at the end of the month in South Africa. The ruling ANC and leading opposition DA are facing another challenger in the form of the Patriotic Alliance. The party, led by former gangster Gayton McKenzie, is known for its hardline policies, including the mass deportation of illegal foreigners and bringing back the death penalty. Polls say the PA won't topple either of the top two, but recent rally turnouts show large support in traditional DA strongholds, meaning a kingmaker role could be on the horizon for the PA. France 24's Anne Wenzel explains.
Of South Africa's 9 provinces, the ANC rules all of them but one, the Western Cape, where the DA won an outright majority in the 2009 general election and have been governing ever since. This weekend, the PA, which is known for supporting the mass deportation of illegal foreigners, made a strong showing as a challenger for the province when it held its final electioneering rally in Cape Town and got a wall-to-wall turnout, filling the Athlone Stadium, which has a capacity of 34,000, as easily as Madonna blocked at a beach in Brazil. The PA's leader, Gayton McKenzie, promised to restore law and order, reserve jobs for South Africans, and bring back the death penalty for murder.
As a person that grew up as a gangster, that grew up as a criminal, a person that understands the underworld, I'm here today to tell you the only way to stop the crime, the killings under my regime, if you kill somebody, you shall be killed also.
McKenzie also said the ANC and DA were both bad choices and that his party would be able to choose who they would align themselves with after the 29th of May. The Patriotic Alliance was formed in 2013 by leaders Gayton McKenzie and Kenny Kunene. By 2021, they were the 7th largest party in South Africa. Their following consists largely of people of colour in the Western Cape, and they now boast a total of 500,000 official members, as well as being influential in Johannesburg coalition politics.
So Gayton McKenzie and the PA on the ballot sheet for those elections on the 29th of May in South Africa, 30 years on from its first taste of democracy in 1994. Well, that's all the news from across the continent for now, but please stay tuned for more here on France 24.